Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I have 25 Dollar Tree Halloween DIYs for you guys all in one video so you can sit back, relax, and enjoy and get inspired to create some Halloween decor for your home on a budget. I don't think it's too early if you love Halloween and love to create. So if you're new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss out on a new video. All right, now let's get into it. For this first DIY, I wanted to make a lighted Halloween tree. So I'm going to use a black broom stick from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use some of these floral branches from Dollar Tree that are very glittery. I have 6 orange and 6 of the pink purple, and then only 5 of the black ones. I just picked up what they had at Dollar Tree, and the first thing I did was remove the top from the handle, and then I'm going to take one of each color and I'm going to start off by placing those inside the broom handle at the top. And then I'm going to use some hot glue to secure those down, and that's going to be the start of the tree. And then to start securing everything, I'm going to go ahead and tie some twine. And as I'm tying the twine and wrapping it around the broom handle, I'm going to be adding in the branches as I go. And I just switched it up with the colors and just alternated those as I went down the broom handle, and I just kept wrapping the twine around the broom handle until I covered up all of the bottom of those branches. Okay, so you're probably thinking wrapping that twine around this broom handle is a tedious task and I have to have a lot of patience. And you're right, I did. I had a lot of patience to do this, but I used twine because that was all I had. So if you're doing this DIY, and if I was to go back and do it again, I would use some black duct tape because that would go much quicker for this process. But like I said, I didn't have it on hand, so I thought of this project and I decided to use the twine. So once all of the branches were put on to mainly the top of the broom handle and just staggering them on the way down, I finished off wrapping the broom handle with the twine. And then once it was all wrapped, I did decide to go ahead and paint the twine with some black paint, and I did that just so that way it would kind of blend in and the branches would stand out more than the trunk of the tree. Then once the trunk was all dry, I wanted to put all of this together, so I just took a bucket from Dollar Tree and some styrofoam, and I hot glued the styrofoam to the bottom of the bucket. And then I used some dry beans for the weight, and I just put about half of the bag in the bottom there. You could use rocks or whatever you have on hand. I had these beans, so it worked. Then I stuck the bottom of the broom handle through the styrofoam, and I did add a little bit of hot glue, which you can't see here because I took it out and then added some hot glue and stuck it back in and stuck the beans around it. Then I added some Spanish moss to the top there, and then I went to the top of the tree and I started pulling out all of the branches just like you would do for a Christmas tree. You just fluff the branches and pull them out. So that way it looks whiter. And then once that was all done, the last thing I did was take some of the battery LED orange lights and wrap those around the trunk, and I hid the battery pack in the moss. This next DIY is super easy. I'm just going to use one of these chair covers from Dollar Tree. I picked up one of the Jacko-Lantern ones. You could use the skeleton one if you wanted to, but they make perfect outdoor pillows because it's a plastic material, so the water just runs right off of them, and they're big and they make a statement. So I just unfolded it, and with the opening there, I just stuffed it with some old old pillow stuffing, and this is typically what I use to stuff all of my pillows. I just take old bed pillows that I replace, and I keep those for when I want to make decorative pillows. And then to close this up, I'm just going to be using some hot glue to secure it down. I just ran it along the seam there and just made sure that it was held together. You could use tacky glue or some other E6000 or something like that you could use, but you would definitely have to clamp it together to hold it while it dried. And that was it for this cute little outdoor jack-o'-lantern pillow. For this DIY, I'm going to be using 8 of the Jack-o'-lantern solar powered lights from Dollar Tree. I'm going to go ahead and pop the heads off of the stakes and set the heads aside to use later on for another DIY. And then I'm going to take the stakes and I'm just going to pop them in together, and you just use the stake to place one on top of the other. Now the bottom stake can come out if you would like to use this specific DIY for outdoor decoration and stake it into the ground, but I'm not going to do that for these. I'm going to set the sticks aside, and I'm going to use 2 of these plastic orange balls from Dollar Tree. Now you can see here they had the barcode and the warning label and things like that on them, and it does not come off with acetone or alcohol or anything like that. I tried, so I decided to use this caulking from Dollar Tree, and I just squeezed it out on top to cover that lettering or wording, and I kind of did it in like a pattern so that it looked like something was spilled on top of it, kind of like it has like a caramel coating on top or something like that, because I'm making lollipops. That's what I'm doing with these balls and the sticks. So anyways, I let these dry for a couple hours, and then I came back and I painted the caulking with some black paint. I just used a big brush, and then I used a smaller brush to go around the edges. I chose black because I kind of was going with the orange and black theme, but you could make these look like caramel apples. You could use red balls, or you could really do anything. You could put glitter on top of them. It's, you know, open for interpretation. So I just painted these black, and then I set them aside on top of some glass bottles to dry. And then to glue the balls onto the sticks, I used some Gorilla Glue, super glue, and I held that there for a minute, and then I used some hot glue to go around the edge of the ball and the stick to keep it secure while it dried. Once everything was dry, I'm going to use this plastic wrap. I've had this for a while. I'm pretty sure you can get this at Dollar Tree, but I'm not sure if I got this at Dollar Tree or not. But I just laid the lollipop on top of that and wrapped the plastic around the stick, and then I used some of this spider web tool that I got from Dollar Tree, and I tied a bow. I did the same thing with the other lollipop, and I think these turned out really cute. Like I said, you could take the stakes out of the bottom of the sticks, and you could stake these in the ground for some outside decor, or they could just be used for inside decor. They are just a cute piece to add to your Halloween decor. Alright, for the next DIY, I'm using those solar-powered jack-o'-lantern heads from the last DIY, but I'm not going to use the necks on them. So I want to take those off, and for that I'm going to be burning them off with my wood burning tool. It just melts the plastic, and then I'm able to kind of just pull it off. You want to be really careful with this DIY because the wood burning tool gets really hot, and so does the plastic. So you probably want to wear some heat sensitive gloves for this. But I couldn't find anything to cut this thick plastic, so this wood burning tool worked pretty good. Now I'm going to be using some fishing line to tie around the stem. I'm just going to insert it in between the pumpkin and the bottom of that stem there. There's just a little space where that fishing line can go, and then I'm just going to tie the fishing line in a double knot so that way it stays, and then I'm going to cut my fishing line really long. I'm going to be hanging these with the fishing line in my tree out front, and they're going to look like floating jack-o'-lanterns. I think this project is so easy and it turned out super cute. For this last DIY, I'm going to be making a door banner, and I'm going to be using this black felt from Dollar Tree. It's pretty long, so it's perfect to make a long banner out of. So I just unfolded it, and then I'm going to go ahead and place a wooden dowel, which was from Dollar Tree, at the top side of this, and I'm just going to fold the fabric over just a little bit to enclose that wooden dowel and keep it in place. And I'm just going to use my hot glue to secure it down. And then to hang the banner, I'm going to use just a piece of twine that I just tied on each end of the wooden dowels that stick out from the felt. And then for my banner, for my lettering, I actually used my Cricut, and I just printed out the word boo, and I'm just using heat transfer vinyl, and I'm just pressing that on to my felt. If you don't have a Cricut, you could use the brand Avery. If you have a printer, they have some printable heat transfer paper that you can print on, and then you can transfer it to your fabric if you wanted to do something like this. I've used it before, and it works pretty well, but I'm going to utilize my Cricut for this DIY. I also printed out a little spider to hang down from the top, and then I cut the bottom of the fabric just a little bit to make it even, and then I also did a little spider web at the bottom. And that was really it for this, and I just hung it on my front door. For this DIY, I'm going to be making a little Halloween gnome out of one of these carvable pumpkins. I'm going to just remove the stem, but I am going to save the stem for this project for the gnome's nose. So the first thing I did was paint the pumpkin with some black paint. I just used some leftover black paint that I used on my fireplace in my house. You could use whatever paint you had, and then I painted the stem with some cream colored paint that I had left over. And then I'm going to use a mop head from Dollar Tree for the beard. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the mop head and separate it in half. These are all one piece that are just laid over in the middle of this black piece on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to separate it in half, and then I'm going to cut off half of the mop head. So you could actually make 2 of these out of all of these supplies. You would just need another pumpkin and another base for the hat, but everything else you could use to make another one. So what I did after I got it all cut off is I just hot glued the top of the mop head onto the top of the pumpkin, and then I needed to trim up his beard so that way it wasn't super long because it was overflowing on the table. So I just trimmed it up at an angle so that way it was just kind of touching the top of the table. And I just played around with it until I got it the way I liked it. And you could also actually unravel these and comb them out if you wanted like a different look as well, but I kind of like them all wound up together like this. So for the hat, I am going to use this tinsel witch hat from Dollar Tree, but I don't like the tinsel, so I picked up a pack of these men's socks, and I'm just going to use one of them, so you could use the other one if you're making another gnome, but I'm just going to use one of them. I cut the bottom off and then I just slipped it over the hat and wrapped it around the underside, and it's great because it's got elastic in it, so it works out perfect that way. And then I just hot glued the heel. I just kind of folded that over on the side there and hot glued that, and then the excess on the top I just cut it off, and then I just kind of hot glued it. I kind of pushed it down into itself and then hot glued it into itself at the top, just the way I liked it. It was just a matter of playing around with it. And then for the little belt around the hat at the top, I just used some black ribbon. I just cut off a piece and then I did hot glue it down so that way it would lay flat along the hat. And then I just tied a little bow and then cut the excess ribbon. That was all I did for the hat, and once it was finished, I just placed it on top of my pumpkin and my mop, and I did use some hot glue to secure it down. And then the last thing I did was add the stem from the pumpkin. I just inserted that into the pumpkin right underneath the hat on top of the beard, and I think this turned out super cute for Halloween. I absolutely love it. For this next DIY, I'm going to use this little red truck that I found at Dollar Tree. It's super cute. It's a little ceramic. It's supposed to be a planter, but you could use it pretty much for anything. I'm going to turn it into a Halloween truck. So the first thing I did was I wanted to paint it orange, so I tried painting it with some orange acrylic paint from Dollar Tree, and I put 2 coats on it and it was not covering the red at all. So I switched it up. You can see here that after the 2 coats, it still looked red. So I used this orange spray paint that I already had, and I gave it just 1 coat of spray paint and let it dry. Next, I took some black paint and I just painted the details back onto the truck, just around the tires. I did the windshield and the windows, and then I also painted the headlights with some black paint as well. Now I'm going to put some pumpkins inside my truck. So I had these orange glittery pumpkins from Dollar Tree already, but I thought the orange clashed with the other orange, so I decided that I needed to paint them. So I'm going to use a skewer and I'm going to break it into 4 pieces, and that's going to help hold my pumpkins while I paint them with my black paint. The skewers are also going to be the stems of my pumpkins, so I'm going to paint the skewers with a little bit of black paint as well, just right above the pumpkin. And then once they dry, I am going to take my scissors and score the skewers where that black paint stops and break off the skewer to make my stems. After I did the pumpkins, I used my Cricut and I printed out a little vinyl sticker that said Happy Halloween. This was a little intricate to weed because it was so small. It did work out, but I intended on doing the other side and doing another design on the other side, but This one was just a little too intricate and it took me a while, so I only did the one side that says Happy Halloween, but it still looks cute. But if you didn't want to use your Cricut or you don't have one, you could find a cute sticker, you could use stencils or freehand it. The last thing I did was I needed to place my pumpkins inside the back of my truck, so I just used some hot glue to secure them down so they weren't flying everywhere when you picked it up. But if you didn't want pumpkins in the back, you could put pretty much any little Halloween decor in there or flowers and use it as a planter, but I think this turned out super cute. For this DIY, I'm going to use 3 of these cute little pumpkin containers from Dollar Tree. They come in 3 different sizes and they all fit into each other. There's a big size, a medium size, and a small one. And I'm going to try to make some stacked pumpkins with them. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove the handles, and then I need some support to stack them. So these are spools that came from Tool from Dollar Tree. I just used the tool, so I kept the spools, and they are more heavy duty than paper towel roll holders or toilet paper roll holders, so they're going to be more stable when I put them inside each of the containers to hold up the other container. So I just trimmed one down to size that fit in the big one, the bottom one, and I'm just going to go ahead and hot glue that down in the middle, then place the middle size one on top of that, hot glue it down, and then I'm going to place the second one in the middle of that second one and hot glue it down, and then the last one, hot glue that one down. So now I have my stacked pumpkins. Now I need to figure out what I'm going to put inside of them. So I decided to fill the top one with some styrofoam. I hot glued it down, and then I had some of these little mums from Dollar Tree left over from some DIYs. So I just plucked some of the flowers off the stems and I started hot gluing them around the top of the top pumpkin to fill it in, and then I started taking them off of the stem and like cutting the stem down and then placing them inside the styrofoam inside the top there. I used about 5 or 6 bunches of these flowers. Obviously, if you have bigger flowers, you would need to use less bunches, but these were really tiny. And then to cover the gaps between the other 2 pumpkins, I used some Spanish moss, and I just tucked it down inside and used a little hot glue to secure it so it wouldn't fall completely inside. And then with a few of the leftover mums that I did have, I kind of sporadically placed them around the moss and hot glued them down a little bit, just to kind of give it a cohesiveness. And then that was it for this. I think it turned out really cute for Halloween. For this DIY, I'm going to use one of these plungers from Dollar Tree. I'm not going to use the plunger, I'm just going to use the handle. And then I'm going to use one of these wooden plaques, also from Dollar Tree. I just lined it up in the middle of the handle and I used some hot glue to secure it down. Definitely would you need to use E6000 or some wood glue, so that way it would have a stronger hold. Then I went ahead and painted the handle and the wooden plaque with some black paint that I used on my other projects. You could definitely paint this with chalkboard paint or chalk paint or just regular acrylic paints, up to you. Then I'm going to be making a witch's broom out of this. So I'm going to use this raffia from Dollar Tree. I unfolded it, and then basically I just measured out how long I wanted the bottom of the broom to be, and then I just started folding the raffia back and forth, keeping it in a bundle as I was folding it, and then I just placed it over my broom handle there, and then I just tied a knot with some twine to keep it in place. Then I just cut the loops on the raffia that I made from folding it back and forth at the bottom, but I left the loops at the top, so just cut the loops at the bottom to undo everything, and then I just trimmed it all up so that way it would be more even. Now this raffia is kind of crazy since it was all folded up, so it sticks up all over the place. I don't know if you could like wet it and let it dry and maybe it would lay down more flat for you, but I didn't mind the craziness of it. I think it kind of adds to the Halloween effect of it, I suppose. And then after I did that, I used the buffalo check ribbon to tie a bow around the twine. I just tied a regular simple bow around it, and then I just cut the excess ribbon off to make my bow. The last thing I did was use my Cricut, and I made this saying to attach to the plaque. I just attached it on to there. You could use, like I said, chalkboard paint, and you could write on here with chalk, or you could freehand it or even use a stencil. It's up to you, but I think this broom turned out really cute. For this last DIY, I picked up one of these little ghosts from Dollar Tree, and I do think it is adorable. However, I do think it needs a makeover. So I am going to do that. I'm going to give it a little makeover. So I flipped it over, and I'm going to start working on the hat first. There is a seam that runs down the middle of the hat, and I just used my seam ripper to rip just a little hole there so that way I could fill it with some stuffing. I just used stuffing from an old pillow that I had lying around. And then once it was fully stuffed, I closed up the seam by just adding a little bit of hot glue and pushing it together, and then just trimming the little bit of the excess that was sticking out. Then the next thing I did was take that orange bow off, and it comes off pretty easily because it was on there with just a little bit of hot glue. So you just gently pull it up and it comes off. And now for the little belt that goes around the hat, I am going to just cut the top off of that sock. There's like an elastic band on the top, so I just cut that off and then just slipped it over the hat. Then I'm going to use some of the buffalo checked ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I made a simple bow. I just tied it, and then I cut off the excess ribbon and hot glued that to the top of that band there, and then just cut the little tails on the bow. I had one of these wooden pumpkins from Dollar Tree that comes in a pack, and I hot glued it to the middle of the bow, and then you couldn't see the eyes of the ghost, so I wanted to flip that lid of the hat up a little bit. So what I did was I just added a little bit of hot glue on the outside, and then I pushed that lid up there, and it worked out perfectly. You can see his eyes now, or her eyes. So now I'm going to work on the legs, and the legs are attached with like a little staple gun not a staple gun, but a staple with some string. So I'm gonna leave the string intact, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pull the legs off of the string. And then I am going to go ahead and cut the orange legs off, leaving the boots with a little bit of a hole. And I'm gonna stuff those boots just like I did with the hat. And I'm gonna leave it open so that way I can attach my new legs to those boots. Now for the new legs, I'm going to use some of that buffalo check ribbon. So I just laid it out to measure out how long I wanted the legs to be, because I wanted them to be longer than the original legs, so that way you could see them dangle below the ghost sheet. So I cut 2 pieces the same exact length, which actually you'll need 4 pieces the same exact length. And what I did was I folded over and hot glued the wire down, so that way it would be a little bit thicker, and then I placed both pieces on top of each other and hot glued the edges down. And then I hot glued the bottom of the leg, and then I stuffed the top of it through that hole, and then I hot glued the leg inside the boot there, and then I hot glued the string back to the leg and attached it, and I did the same thing with the other leg, and that was it. This ghost makeover I think is adorable, and I love the buffalo checked. It's so cute. For this DIY, I'm going to be using one of these foam wreath forms from Dollar Tree and some of the black yarn that Dollar Tree also sells. And I'm just going to start off by hot gluing a piece of the yarn to the wreath form, and then I'm just going to start wrapping the yarn all the way around the wreath form. This is a little tedious. It did take about, I would say about 20-25 minutes to wrap this whole thing in yarn, but it wasn't too bad. And I would suggest before wrapping it to probably paint the wreath form black, so that way you can't see any of the green showing through. Like you can see a little bit of green on mine, but I didn't mind that. It was fine. But if you don't want to see that green, just paint it black, so that way it takes it away. But I wrapped it all the way around. I just hot glued it in the beginning, and then also once I got to the end, I used a little hot glue on the back side and just snipped the rest of the yarn. So now with this white yarn that I also got from Dollar Tree, I'm just going to go ahead and take a piece of it and flip the wreath over to the back side, and I'm going to hot glue that yarn on the back side, and then I'm going to run that white yarn around to the other side and flip it over, and then hot glue it onto the back of the wreath on the other side. And then I'm just going to cut that excess yarn, and then I'm going to do this 3 more times around the wreath in a crisscross pattern, so that way it gives me that look of a spider web. Okay, so now I'm going to work on the middle section of the spider web so that it actually looks like a spider web. I'm going to take a piece of yarn and I'm going to tie it off on just one of the pieces of yarn that I've already attached to the wreath, and I'm going to just place that piece of yarn over and then pull it under the opposite way to loop it around each piece of yarn as I'm working my way around the wreath and making a circle out of this yarn. And so that way the pieces of yarn will be looped and they will be secure to the other pieces of yarn. You can still kind of play around with them and move them. So you don't want to keep it super tight, but you want to keep it tight enough so everything just stays in place and it doesn't fall apart. And then once you get around to the beginning again, you just tie it off and you cut that excess yarn. So I did this a total of 5 times around the wreath. Each section I just got bigger with it, so I just cut a bigger piece of yarn as I was going around the wreath, so that way it started to take the shape of a spider web. And I think it looks really cute like this, and it's an easy way to make a spider web with yarn. And you could do this in a bigger form, like on a wall or something like that, which I've done before, and it's super easy and makes a big statement. Once I got the spider web all done, I'm just gonna take these cute little spiders from Dollar Tree. They come in different colors, black and purple and orange, but I just got the orange glitter ones. That's all they had out, and I just placed them on the wreath and hot glued them down where they needed to be, and that was it. For this next DIY, I'm using 3 sets of these skeleton hand tongs that come from Dollar Tree. Now, I just needed the hands. I don't need the actual arms. So I'm gonna take my miter saw and I'm gonna cut right below the wrists on each one of these. And that way I'm just left with the hands for this DIY. Next, I'm gonna use 3 skulls from Dollar Tree. And I'm gonna do the See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and Speak No Evil with these hands and skulls. And for this See No Evil, I just hot glued the pinkies and the thumbs. The pinkies set right below the eyes, and the thumbs rested right on the forehead. And then for the Hear No Evil, the index fingers rested right on the side of the face, and then the thumbs rested right on the back of the skull. So I was able to hot glue those perfectly. Now you could use E6000 along with the hot glue, or just E6000 if you had time to wait for them to dry for a little bit stronger of a hold, but bonding plastic to plastic with hot glue seemed to work pretty well for me. The last one for the Speak No Evil, it was a little bit more tricky to get the hands to lay right, but the thumbs just rested right below the eyes eventually, and then the pinkies rested right on the chin. So I just hot glued both of those down, and then the fingers interlocked, just kind of like the See No Evil did on the first one. The last thing I did to these to just elevate the look was to use some gold metallic spray paint that I already had, and I spray painted each one of them, and I love how these turned out. For this next DIY, I'm using 4 of these skeleton heads from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to arrange 3 of them kind of in a triangle shape, and then I'm going to attach them together to each other with some hot glue. Again, you could use E6000 for a stronger hold. And then I'm taking the last one and just placing it on top, just kind of a little bit sideways, and hot gluing it down. And then I'm going to spray paint this whole thing with some black spray paint. All I have was chalkboard paint. You could use whatever black paint you have, or you don't even have to paint these. And then I took these LED battery operated orange lights from Dollar Tree, and I'm just gonna wrap them around the skull heads the way I like, just kind of playing around with them, and that way they look like they are kind of glowing. But I wanted to cover up the cords so they weren't sticking out, so I decided to use some of this Spanish moss from Dollar Tree, and I just kind of pulled it apart and tucked it in the nooks and crannies and where the skull heads set together. I didn't hot glue this. I didn't think it needed it. I just kind of pushed it in place and it stayed there. And then I just kind of played around with the lights and the moss as I was putting it in there. And then to attach the battery pack, I just hot glued it to the back of one of the heads. So that way you can't see it from the front of this display, and making sure that you have access to the actual batteries and to turn it on and off. So I think this turned out to be a cute, spooky display for Halloween. For this DIY, I'm going to use one of the hanging ghosts from Dollar Tree that have the little arms attached to it, and I'm going to make it a standing little ghost trick-or-treater. So to make it standing, I'm going to use some scrap chicken wire I had in my barn, and I'm just going to fold the top two ends over to make a cone shape, and I'm going to use some zip ties to hold it together there at the top. So the end is bigger than the top, and I'll show you that in a second. Now, if you don't have chicken wire, you could use 2 of the wire waste baskets from Dollar Tree and just stack them on top of each other to make your standing ghost. Now you could see the chicken wire when I put the ghost over top of it. So I used a white old pillowcase I had to layer that over top of the chicken wire so that way you couldn't see that. I just slipped it over top and then I hot glued those top 2 pieces at the top inside there so that way they weren't sticking out. Now I'm just going to place my ghost over top of the chicken wire, and I am just going to hot glue that little piece of styrofoam that is the ghost's head or face down inside that smaller side of the chicken wire. Then I just placed the sheet of the ghost over top of the front and then flipped it over to the back, and I used that middle section that was kind of cut through to kind of hot glue the front of the ghost sheet and wrap it around the back side just to kind of cinch it in just a little bit so it wasn't just flopped over, because the back of the ghost sheet is shorter than the front side of the ghost. And then I wanted to give my ghost trick-or-treater a little bucket, so I picked up these little Jacko-Lanterns at Dollar Tree, and they were perfect size. Now the little arms have little hooks in them, wire hooks, so I used that to my advantage, and I just slid the little handle of the Jack-o'-lantern bucket through those wire hooks on each little hand and just covered the hands back up with the ghost's sheet. Lastly, I decided to put a witch's hat on my little ghost trick-or-treater. Unfortunately, Dollar Tree doesn't have any witch's hats out right now, at least at mine. So I decided to go ahead and make one on my own with some felt from Dollar Tree that I already had. So I just cut a square out and then I shaped it into a cone shape and cut off the excess fabric. And then I just hot glued it together. Then I used some stuffing from an old pillow to stuff the cone just to give it some more shape so that way it wouldn't be a floppy hat. Then for the brim of the hat, I just used another piece of felt and cut it into a circle shape. And then I just hot glued that cone to the circle to make my hat. Now this hat isn't perfect. I could have made it probably a little bit better, but this was kind of on a whim. And I think I'll probably go ahead and replace it later on when I find a witch's hat at Dollar Tree. I did go ahead and add a piece of ribbon that I had from my Halloween stash last year from Dollar Tree, and I just hot glued it around the top there. And I still think it turned out super cute. I just hot glued it to his head, and he looks adorable just as he is, but I'll probably replace the hat later. For this last DIY, I'm using 3 of these 10 buckets from Dollar Tree. I'm drawing 3 different jack-o'-lantern faces on each one of them just with a Sharpie marker. I'm not worried about messing up because I'm going to cover up the Sharpie marker mistakes later on by painting it, so I wasn't worried about that at all. And I just looked online for some jack-o'-lantern faces and tried to recreate them the best that I could. Now I'm going to be doing like the hole punch tin can lanterns in these buckets. Now these buckets are flimsy, and if you're trying to do a nail and hammer on them, they will collapse in on themselves. I've done this before on my channel, and some of the tips that I got from other subscribers are saying to freeze water inside the buckets, and then that way when you drill your holes or you punch your holes, you won't get the bucket collapsing in on itself. So I didn't do that, as you can see here. I just used a block of styrofoam from Dollar Tree. I still got some dents and some dings, but that's okay. I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think freezing the water inside of it would definitely work much better. But if you don't mind the dents and dings, this was fine. So now what I'm going to do is I am just going to paint the inside of them black. And now I'm going to come back and tape off the parts of the twine on the bucket. And then I'm also going to tape off on the inside of the buckets where the faces are punched out at. I'm putting tape there as well, so when I paint, the paint won't go through there because I'm using spray paint. And then I'm also taping the top of the buckets as well. All right, this is where I paint the outside of the buckets with some orange spray paint to cover up those mistakes. And then I just removed the tape from each of the buckets. And now I'm gonna place some candles. You can use battery operated candles. I just didn't have any. And I made some cute little jack-o'-lantern buckets to sit outside or inside, wherever you want to display them. For this first DIY, I'm using 2 of these coffin signs from Dollar Tree. They are reversible. One side says welcome and one side says trick or treat. I'm also going to be using a piece of white foam board from Dollar Tree. I ended up painting it black, so you could use black foam board from Dollar Tree if you wanted to. Then I'm going to take one of the coffins and I'm going to trace out one of the sides, and I am going to make it probably about 2 inches high. So it just depends on how high you want your sides of your coffin to be, because that's what the foam board is going to be, is the sides of the coffin. So I just cut that piece out with my X-Acto knife, and then I used it to trace another side, and I cut that side out with the X-Acto knife as well. So I have 2 sides for my coffin. And then for the top and the bottom sides of the coffin, I just used that piece of foam board to trace out the width of that, and then use the coffin to trace out the bottom and the top of the foam board, and then cut those out with my X-Acto knife as well. All right, now that I have all 4 sides cut out, I'm going to go ahead and attach them to one of the coffins. It doesn't matter what size, because again, I'm going to be painting this. So I just started off with the top piece, and I'm just hot gluing the foam board down to the coffin. You could use super glue, E6000, whatever your preference is, but hot glue seems to work okay for the foam board and the wood from Dollar Tree, or the fake wood from Dollar Tree. And then for the side pieces, I cut the pieces at the angle, so that way it would be easier to attach because you don't need that angle. And then I just hot glued the one piece down, and then hot glued the longer piece down, and then hot glued those pieces together. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for the bottom and the other side for my coffin. And then I just used a little bit of extra hot glue around the inside just to reinforce everything, so that way it gave it a little bit of a stronger hold. Now that everything is put together, I'm going to take some black spray paint and I'm going to spray paint the whole thing. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some battery operated LED purple lights from Dollar Tree that you can get in the Halloween section, and I just hot glued the battery pack to the bottom side of the coffin, and then I'm going to feed those lights through the little hole in the coffin sign where the hanger goes. And that way the lights will be inside of the coffin and you won't be able to see the wires. Now this little coffin is perfect size for one of the skeletons from Dollar Tree. So I picked one of those up and he's gonna go inside the coffin, but I wanted his eyes to glow. So I'm gonna use those LED lights and I'm gonna put them through his head to come out his eyes. So I used my hot glue gun to start off with by using the heat to poke eye holes through and then also 2 holes in the back of his head. But unfortunately that wasn't big enough because I couldn't get the LED lights through his head to the eyes to poke out. Like, it was just too difficult. So I ended up cutting a hole in the back of his head that was big enough for me to stick my thumb and my index finger through, so that way I could push that light through his eyeball and the light would just stick out enough, if that makes sense. I did use a pair of tweezers, so that way it would help me kind of pull the light out once I pushed it far enough in the eye. And this skeleton, his head is flexible, so if you bend it a little bit, you can kind of push it back into shape. And I was able to get both LED lights through his eyeballs. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my skeleton on one of the sides of my coffin. And I also put the lights up against one of the sides so that way it would glow more. And his head is going to stick out and his arm and one of his legs. And then I'm going to take the other coffin sign and I'm going to lay that on top of the coffin and hot glue the one side down. I chose to have the welcome side facing out, but you could have the trick or treat side. It's up to you. And then I just hot glued his hand and his foot to the front of the coffin, so that way he looks like he's peeking out. And then to cover up the hole in the top of the sign, I used this skeleton spider, and that was it for some spooky decor. For this next DIY, I'm using one of these thankful buffalo checked signs from Dollar Tree, and I am going to go ahead and paint the top thankful part with some white acrylic paint because I don't want that to show. Then I'm going to use 3 of these wooden ghosts. They do come on their own base, but one of my bases broke off, so I ended up just pulling off the other 2 bases, and then I just used some sandpaper to smooth them out. Now I'm going to take some of that white acrylic paint and I'm going to paint both sides of my ghost. I did have to use probably about 3 coats to make it look really white, because for some reason this acrylic paint from Dollar Tree just does not cover very well, but it worked out. I just had to use a few more coats. Once everything was dry, I'm going to take my sign and flip it over, and I'm going to attach my ghost to the buffalo checked side. So I just used hot glue and I hot glued it down, and then I had the ghost's little hands, I guess, overlapping the middle ghost, and hot glued those down to each other. Then I took some wooden letters to spell out boo, and I painted those with some black paint, both the back and the front. I also painted some wooden beads. I painted 2 black, 4 orange, and 2 white. I got these wooden beads off of Amazon. I'll leave the link down below in the description box. Once everything was dry, I took a piece of twine and measured that out, the length from each ghost's last arm, and then I'm gonna go ahead and string my wooden beads onto my string. I put 2 of the orange beads in between the B and the O, and then another one in between the 2 O's. And then I hot glued my letters to the top of my twine, or the top of the letters to the twine. And then I just alternated the rest of the colors on each side of the word with the white, orange, and black. And then I hot glued my twine to the hands of my ghost on the back there, like you see. And that was it for this simple little DIY. You can put candles on the back of this and have it glow. It's really cute for Halloween. For this next DIY, I'm going to be making a crystal ball. I'm going to be using these skeleton hands I spray painted with some gold spray paint, and then a pillar that I got from Dollar Tree that I'm spray painting also with gold spray paint. And then for the crystal ball itself, I'm using one of the glass bowl candle holders from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use this sea glass spray paint in a rose color to lightly spray the inside of my glass bowl. And then once everything is dry, I'm ready to put it all together. So I'm going to be using some LED purple lights from Dollar Tree as well, but I don't want the black wire to show through my glass. So I'm using some stuffing from an old pillow to just conceal the wires, so that way the lights show through, but you can't see the wires once it's inside the glass. So I'm just going to place all of that inside of the glass, and then place the glass upside down on top of my pillar. And I'm going to hot glue that around so it doesn't fall off, because it just fits on top of there. I would definitely use E6000 or some super glue for a stronger hold. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach my skeleton hands to the side of my glass bowl. So I just lined it up the way I liked it, and then I used again a little bit of hot glue on some of the fingers to hold it to the glass bowl, and then a little bit of hot glue to the bottom of the wrist to hold it against the pillar. Again, super glue or E6000 would work so much better to hold everything together. And then for the battery pack, I just hot glued that to the back of the pillar. The width of the pillar and the battery pack are perfect, so it conceals it. And that was it for this spooky crystal ball. This DIY is super simple. It's a $1 DIY. I'm just going to use 4 of these photo frames from Dollar Tree, and then I printed out these skull heads from canva.com. I will leave the free printable link down below in the description box. Just printed them out on regular white printer paper. And I'm just going to simply place each one of them in each one of the frames. And that's it for this DIY. Like I said, it's super simple. I got the photo frames with the little white piece of mat, and then also it has the little foam pieces on the mat. So it kind of gives the picture an elevated look, which is nice. And you could also print these off on a little bit better of paper, but it's just a high-end look for only $1. I love how these turned out. For this last DIY, I'm going to be making a witchy candy bowl with one of these candy bowls from Dollar Tree. I went ahead and spray painted just the outside of it black, and then I left the inside just plain orange. Now I'm going to be using 2 rolls of this tulle from Dollar Tree. This one says it's glow in the dark and sparkly, but they do have other types there, so you can use whatever color you wanted to, or whatever type you wanted to. And what I'm going to do is I am just going to hot glue the tulle to the top around the bowl, and I'm just going to pinch it as I hot glue to pleat it, so that way this is going to look kind of like the witch's skirt. So I just pinched it, and then I hot glued it, and then just kept working my way around the bowl as I went. It did take 2 rolls of this tulle, but just barely. I almost got away with just 1, but I just needed a little bit more from the other roll. So I went ahead and just started where I left off at and continued to hot glue, and then once I got to the beginning where I started, I just cut my tulle off and then hot glued it down. Now on the top there, you can see some hot glue through the tulle, so I took some of this nautical rope from Dollar Tree and I just hot glued it around the top there, just so that way it would clean it up and look nice, and you wouldn't be able to see the hot glue. And it didn't take a full thing of rope, it just took about half of it to go around the bowl. Now that the bowl part is done, I'm going to go ahead and work on the legs that are going to be hanging from the bowl. And don't pay attention to this here. I'm actually only going to be using 1 set of these witch's legs from Dollar Tree. The other set, I had a different idea, so just ignore the second set. Just use 1 set of the witch's legs from Dollar Tree. And I'm going to take a seam ripper and I'm just going to pull out the thread for the shoes, and then also the thread at the top of the hanger there, so that way I'm left with 1 long piece, and then I'm going to fold it over and cut it into 2, so that way I can have 2 legs. Then I just used a little bit of hot glue at the bottom to secure the bottom down, and then at the top I left open because I'm going to go ahead and stuff it just with some old stuffing that I had from a pillow, and I am going to just stuff it in there. It helped to use a skewer to push it all the way down to the end, and then you just kind of push on it and fluff it a little bit, so that way it breaks up the stuffing once it's in there, so it doesn't look so disjointed. I didn't stuff the legs all the way to the top. I left about 1 to 1.5 inches of fabric at the top that didn't have stuffing in it, and you'll see why later. And then I did go ahead and hot glue the top of the legs together after I got them all stuffed. And also, when you're starting out putting the stuffing in the legs in the beginning, there is a seam to keep the legs together. When you open that leg up to put the stuffing in, the seam will come apart a little bit, but if you put a little bit of hot glue on the seam and let it dry, then you won't have a problem finishing stuffing the legs. Once the legs were both stuffed, I just hot glued the feet to each one of the legs, and here that's kind of where I was playing around with both of the feet from the other set, because I thought maybe I would stuff them, but I didn't end up doing that. So I just hot glued the feet down. Now to attach my legs to my candy bowl, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife and carefully make 2 slits on each side of the inside of the bowl where the crease is. And you want to be really careful with the X-Acto knife. You just want to make 2 small slits big enough to pull that piece of fabric on each one of those legs at the top there where you did not stuff through that bowl. And then you just fold the piece of fabric over and use a little bit of hot glue to secure it down. And that is it. This candy bowl turned out so cute. It's perfect to hold candy for Halloween. Web 3-tier rack for $39.99 from Kirkland's. So I took 3 of these spiderweb baskets from Dollar Tree. Each of them are $1 a piece. And I had a plunger from Dollar Tree also already in my craft stash. I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to start off first by flipping the basket over, and I'm going to take my wood burning tool so that way I can make holes in each of my baskets in the center. So I just used my wood burning tool in that round tip, and I pressed on the center of the basket while it was upside down to make my holes. You want to be careful with the wood burning tool because it is very hot, and you don't want to touch the plastic right afterwards because it is very hot as well. So that's why I'm using pliers to get the excess plastic off. Now, once my holes are burned into my spider web bowls, I'm just going to go ahead and insert them onto the handle of the plunger. So I just placed them through the hole, and I put one down all the way at the bottom, and I used a little hot glue to secure it to the plunger. Then the second one, I put it about halfway onto the handle, and I used a little bit of hot glue to secure it down in the middle. And then the last one, I just inserted the handle just a little bit through the hole and used a little bit of hot glue inside the basket and on the bottom of the basket. Of course, this is going to hold a lot because it's just held with hot glue, but you could use E6000 and it might hold a little bit more. Now, I needed something to weigh the bottom down, and I should have did this in the beginning, but I didn't think about it. So I went ahead and I took the plunger and I used that to make a circle in some cardboard and cut that out. And then I'm going to take those rocks from Dollar Tree and I'm going to put them inside the plunger, and then I hot glued that piece of cardboard to the bottom of the plunger to hold the rocks in. And this is just going to make it more sturdy and stable while it's standing up. And then I'm going to take this spray paint, which I got from Walmart, and I'm just going to spray paint the whole thing. And while it dries, I'm going to take these 2 spiders from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use a little bit of gray acrylic paint to paint the body of each spider to get rid of the sparkles, so that way they kind of look a little bit more like the Kirkland's original 3-tier baskets. So once everything is dry, I'm just going to go ahead and take one of the spiders and I'm going to attach some twine to the back of it with some hot glue, so that way it can hang like the original, and then I'm just going to tie it on to the basket. And then I just placed the other one inside the basket like the original had, and that was it. I think this turned out really cute. I did put a list of all of the supplies that I used. I didn't purchase some of them, but I put everything on there excluding hot glue and the wood burning tool and things like that, so that way you can get an idea of how much it would cost if you needed paint and everything else. For this first DIY, I'm going to be using some of this brown craft paper from the Dollar Tree. I just rolled it out, and I rolled it out pretty long. I didn't measure, unfortunately, but I rolled it enough so that way I could roll each end up a few times. So it's up to you and up to your discretion how big you want your sign to be. I just cut out the piece, and then I'm going to use these big giant skewers. They came from Dollar Tree back in the summertime. They don't have them now, at least at my Dollar Tree, but I'm sure that you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get wooden dowels that are $1 or $2 for this project to use for this part. So you just want to lay the wooden skewers on each end of the paper and then hot glue it and roll it a few times on each end. And then to decorate the paper and make a piece of art, I am going to use this Jack-o'-lantern felt pumpkin from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use that as my stencil to trace it out. And then I decided to add a little bit of extra detail to the pumpkin. So I just went through and I lightly drew the lines on the pumpkin, and then I drew the stem out a little bit, and I drew the little curly cues from the stems, and I just used a black Sharpie to do all of this, and then I just defined the lines when I went back after I got it the way I liked it. It's not perfect. I'm not an artist. I'm sure a lot of you could do a much better job on putting details on this pumpkin, but I did my best. And then I wanted to add some lettering to this sign and say Happy Halloween. So I got these stencils off of Amazon a long time ago. I've used them for many projects. They are reusable plastic stencils, and they have uppercase and lowercase cursive letters that you can connect all of them together as you are stenciling everything in. So that is what I'm using. I will link them down below in the description box if anybody's interested in these stencils. Like I said, I've used them for multiple projects, so they've come in handy. And then the last thing I decided to do to decorate this was to connect one of the little curly cues to the Y on the happy. And then to hang this, I'm just going to use a piece of twine and tie knots on each end of the dowel that I have, or the skewer that I used, and that was it. This next DIY is super easy. It involves an 8x10 canvas with a frame from Dollar Tree. I just used an X-Acto knife to score the back of the canvas to detach it. And I actually did something similar like this for a fall DIY this year, so this might look familiar to you guys. But it's really easy to print on these canvases with a regular printer. So what I did was, after I got the canvas removed from the frame, there is a crease from where the canvas is wrapped around the frame. You just want to cut that crease off, so that way when you lay the canvas in your printer, it is smooth and it goes through easily. And then what I did was I took the frame and I just used some American walnut stain to stain it. And while that dries, I am going to just insert my canvas into my printer and print out my printable, which I created. You can get this for yourself with the link down below in the description box, and you can print it out for your DIY. And then I just lined it up on my canvas. Mine printed a little crooked just because I put the canvas in a little bit crooked in my printer, but typically it comes out pretty straight as long as you are paying attention. And then I just cut the excess canvas off after I hot glued it down to my frame, and that was it. DIY is also super easy. I just picked up one of these black picture frames from Dollar Tree, and I made a free printable for you guys. You can print this off. It is linked down below in the description box, and it is a countdown for Halloween. So I just printed it off on regular paper. You could use cardstock or whatever you have, and then I put it in the frame. And then the best part about it is you can write on the glass with some dry erase markers, or I used a liquid chalk marker, but I always end up losing the markers or misplacing them whenever I have something like this. So I decided I'm going to dress it up a little bit with a little bit of this white and orange twine. I just wrapped it around the logo there and hot glued it, and then I just used a little bit of that twine and tied it on the cap at the top, and then I'm going to hot glue that onto the back of the picture frame, so that way I always know where my marker is and I don't lose it. And then I can just erase the number every day and rewrite it. And it's easy as that. I have a cute little Halloween countdown sign to get ready for Halloween. For this next DIY, I'm going to use one of these glass vases from Dollar Tree and some of these skull heads from Dollar Tree. I actually ended up using 3 packages of them. There's 8 in a package. And basically what I did was I just layered them from the bottom of the vase and hot glued them to the vase and then worked my way up. It gave me 3 layers of skull heads using 3 bags. So if you wanted to do more and cover the whole vase, you could. You would just need a few more bags of the heads to do that. And I hot glued them to the vase, and then I also put a dab of hot glue to the side of each of the heads just to keep everything together. And then once I got everything together, I am going to spray paint it with some black spray paint. This just came from Walmart. And then that's it. I decided to put some pampas grass that I got from Amazon in it, and I think it looks really chic for Halloween. This last DIY, I'm going to use one of these carvable pumpkins from Dollar Tree. I just removed the stem and the tag. I'm not going to use those. And then I used a glass candle holder from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to place it on top of the pumpkin, and I'm going to trace out the circle. And then I just used an X-Acto knife to cut out that circle, and then my glass is going to fit snugly inside my pumpkin. Now I'm going to be making a pumpkin spider candy dish out of this. So I took one of these tinsel spiders from Dollar Tree and I just popped the head and body off of the legs. And now I'm just cleaning up the legs from where it was hot glued on there. Just making sure I get up all of the tinsel and the extra hot glue. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the body of the spider. So I just popped the head off of it, and then I just unwrapped the tinsel off of it, and I cleaned that up as well. So now what I'm going to do is I am just going to hot glue the legs to the bottom of my pumpkin, and with the head I am just going to attach that to the top of my pumpkin with some hot glue. Now, before I painted it, I wanted to kind of take away the styrofoam look to this pumpkin, and I decided to use the tissue paper method. So basically what you do is just use some Mod Podge, paint that on to the surface of the pumpkin, and then you just take some crumpled up tissue paper and lay that on top of the Mod Podge, and then add some more Mod Podge on top of it. And this is supposed to give it an older looking effect, a different type of effect. I just don't like, after I paint these pumpkins, it still looks like a styrofoam pumpkin. So I was trying to cover that up. I did the body and the head, and then I painted it all with that same black spray paint that I painted the last project with. And then I filled it with some candy corn and pumpkins, and it turned out cute. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave me a Halloween word or a Halloween emoji down in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.